Good afternoon. Welcome to the press conference of the Education, Youth, Culture and Sport Council. This is a meeting of 2 days, so this morning we will have the Portuguese Minister of Higher Education, Manuel Heitor, and the Minister of Education, Tiago Brandão Rodrigues. Also with us, Commissioner Maria Gabriel. Both ministers will give a short statement on education topics. Then I will give the floor to the Commissioner of Education, and then finally you can make your questions. Minister Manuel Heitor, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to everyone. The Council has adopted today two rather important conclusions and then have a policy debate on higher education. The conclusions were first on the inclusion and the need to guarantee open access to education throughout Europe, and the second conclusion on the critical role of the European Universities Alliances. I believe my colleague will take care of the first issue, and I'd like to focus these few minutes on the meaning of the conclusion which has been adopted about European higher education. We are facing and we are living unprecedented times in Europe and worldwide, and the role of training and education, in particular of higher education, is transforming our societies and will transform more and more our societies, particularly in close articulation with research and innovation. And that triangulation has become the key issue for the development of European higher education universities. The conclusions adopt, among many other issues, three critical areas. First, the articulation between education and research through human resources, particularly in terms of best practices of career development, of recruitment, in particular recruitment of young researchers, and about the flux of talent. And it has become very consensus throughout Europe that European universities should play a critical role on promoting the recruitment of young researchers and better career development practices. Overall, Europe needs more scientists, and the role of higher education universities is clear. But there are two other issues, one on joint degrees and joint accreditation, particularly in terms of the simplification of current procedures, particularly about the automatic recognition of joint degrees throughout Europe in the European University Alliances. The third critical issue has become a very important issue in the idea to have universities without walls, and it refers essentially to labour market relevance and outcomes, and more to the need to open formal and non-formal education to employers, public and private employers, and to give relevance to issues such as micro-credentials in order to make sure that people at large, and adults in particular, learn throughout their life. Adult learning, and particularly lifelong learning, has become quite unequal throughout Europe with different practices, and certainly we should share the common values of learning throughout our lives. Certainly the issues associated with funding, with excellence, and with the European values of multiculturality has been addressed in the policy debates, and it was consensual around the table, the common issue of guarantee a stepwise process towards the transformation of higher education, and particularly the conclusions of the working group that the Commission established by December 2021. It was also important to refer that in the context of the ongoing conference on the future of Europe, the role of higher education in articulation with research and innovation has become critical for the European project. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I will give now the floor to the Minister of Education, please.
Muito obrigado. Nestas duas jornadas de trabalho, começamos hoje de manhã com a formação de educação do Conselho de Educação, Juventude, Cultura e Desporto. Tratamos vários temas que foram enunciados pelo meu colega Manuel Leitor, mas eu gostava de falar especificamente sobre os temas relacionados com a equidade e a inclusão. Como sabemos, a equidade e a inclusão e também o sucesso educativo na educação são princípios básicos que os sistemas educativos tendem e tentam alcançar. No entanto, a equidade e a inclusão continuam a ser um enorme desafio para os nossos sistemas educativos, com diferenças significativas entre Estados-membros e dentro de cada um dos nossos Estados-membros. Sabemos que o contexto socioeconómico dos nossos cidadãos continua a ser um fator muitas vezes a aquisição de competências e limitando também, assim, a mobilidade social. Aprovou as conclusões sobre a equidade, sobre a inclusão na educação, a fim de podermos promover o sucesso educativo para todos os nossos estudantes. Os nossos sistemas de educação e formação, que têm de ser necessariamente inclusivos, têm um papel fundamental a desempenhar para aumentar o aproveitamento escolar, para aumentar os níveis de competências dos nossos cidadãos e, necessariamente, para diminuir as nossas taxas de desemprego, como podemos também ver com todo o trabalho feito na Cimeira Social do Porto. É necessário, é fundamental olhar para o espectro da educação numa abordagem que possa envolver toda a comunidade escolar para melhorar a igualdade de oportunidades.
We need to make sure that everyone can promote all the possibilities at all levels of education in all existing areas. We also need to do more to identify the public policy measures that could help this education system for all of us. We know that these principles of equity and inclusion in education are of main concern to all of us, especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the ministers of education had a very useful exchange of information and experience on the measures that each and every member states have taken. This exchange of information was also facilitated by the online platform launched by the Portuguese presidency. And we have seen and continue seeing the great cooperative spirit between the member states, especially now in these very difficult situation that we're living through at the moment, where sharing and mutual learning is absolutely vital.
Thank you, Minister. I will give now the floor to the Commissioner, Maria Gabriel.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Minister. Dear Manuel, dear Tiago, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank the Portuguese presidency for organising this Council of Ministers for Higher Education. This morning's Minister, as the Minister has said, led to the adoption of a number of conclusions, which will be the basis for our action to accompany a European higher education and education during the digital transformation. This follows on from our February's informal meeting. We're particularly keen to see equal access to education inclusion. Right from the start of my mandate as Commissioner, I have always defended the principle of making it possible for everybody to be successful, which is about our European principle of solidarity. We've been through the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, which has only served to highlight existing inequalities and has even increased some inequalities. To achieve the objectives of access to education and training and success for everyone is a long-term project, though, and that includes our initiative on the European education area. If we're to be successful, we require strong political determination and commitment on the part of all players. In the Commission also, we have a number of actions, but I'd like to mention three of them. First of all, we'd like to propose in July a recommendation to Council on hybrid learning. Far be it from me to impose even more screen on our children, but hybrid can also mean visits to forests and museums or partnerships with historical locations and theatres to make learning lively and situated in present reality. In the context of this future proposal, for the very first time, we've also consulted directly children who have shared drawings with us showing what their learning environment ideally would look like. Children like to see open schools, outdoor schools, a warm social place which combines theoretical and practical learning. So we need to encourage new ways of teaching and learning so we can include more students who might otherwise fall behind. And this also is part of our Digital Education Action Plan for period 2021-2027. Secondly, we've shown ambition when it comes to allowing young Europeans to be successful. Next year, we're presenting a new initiative, Pathways for School Success, which will seek to promote success in school by reducing, in particular, the number of schools who don't achieve basic skills levels or drop out of school too early. And then we have commissioned a group of experts to work up proposals on favourable learning conditions for those particular at risk of failure at school, and also work is to be done on well-being at school. Inclusion is one of the guiding threads of our Erasmus Plus programme for the next 7 years. Our first calls for proposals for projects have been launched recently. Now, this should be available for all learning ages from kindergarten to university and beyond. Also, I'd like to recall that European universities are pioneers when it comes to transforming higher education. It's crucial that we work together with member states, stakeholders in higher education to create the necessary conditions for this sector to become more interconnected, more innovative, more inclusive, more digital and more sustainable. The Commission commits itself to supporting this endeavour through Erasmus Plus with a supplement to the Horizon Europe programme. Beyond the need for sustainable finance, universities have a number of other challenges and obstacles to tackle when we need to work across borders. And we need to work together to remove these obstacles. It's important to guarantee the maintenance of an inclusive model to encourage diversity and expand alliances whilst respecting institutional independence, offering possibilities of cooperation even beyond the European Union. We plan, in cooperation with member states and stakeholders in the sector, to have a European diploma which would imply excellence in higher education at international level. We'll have an opportunity of talking about this as we move towards completing the European area of education and talk about the European digital education programme, which are the two cornerstones for our educational future to underpin recovery in Europe. We need to find shorter forms of learning, which are also certified by micro-certificates. That's an innovative way of supporting lifelong learning. We need European standards so that we can ensure greater transparency, reliability, recognition and portability of such micro-certificates. And we'll make a proposal to the Council by the end of the year to that end. So I'd like to thank again the Portuguese Presidency for their conclusions and for the opportunity to debate these issues. And I do hope this will enable us to make excellence a matter for everyone.
Merci. We can now start with the questions. You all know the procedures. When you have the floor, turn on your camera and your speaker. Introduce yourself with name and which media you belong and who you address your questions to. So please just raise your hands. We have Andrea Neves from Antena 1. Andrea.
Muito bom dia. Não, boa tarde, aliás, creio que me devem estar.
Yes, good afternoon. I have a question about equity and equal opportunities for all. And I'd like to know if you have been thinking about the problems that we're going to face during the recovery. And I'd also like to know how can this inclusion also involve Erasmus, which is vital for exchanges between people.
First to the Minister of Higher Education.
Muito obrigado pela pergunta.
Well, thank you very much for that question. Well, the answer is clearly yes, certainly in Portugal. And of course, it depends on the national options that each member state has taken in drawing up their recovery and resilience plans. But the conclusions that have been adopted today are quite clear about the need for adequate financing in order to underpin our education and training systems. In Portugal, in particular, the Recovery and Resilience Plan is focusing on two particularly important initiatives. The particular impulse for the youngsters so as to help youngsters access tertiary education, especially in the sectors of sciences and mathematics, and also to encourage them to have short-term training sessions. This is something we also discussed today. And we need to make sure that we can flesh out the prospects of 50% of youngsters who access higher education and try and bring up that figure to 60%. And we've also got the Portuguese Recovery and Resilience Plan that will focusing on encouraging and stimulating lifelong learning, and to make sure that adult education is encouraged, especially lifelong training, especially in the so-called higher education without walls. Now, on Erasmus in particular, today Portugal is very pleased to see that there's an increased participation in Erasmus. We're at the same average levels of participation at the rest of Europe, but the European average still means only 10% of youngsters in higher education had access to Erasmus or participated in Erasmus. So if you compared to 20 years ago, it was basically 2%. So improvements have been made, significant progress for Portugal, but we need to do more to increase greater participation in Erasmus. Portugal, like other member states, do have a clear plan to triple the participation in Erasmus between this year and 2027. We've also got the Erasmus Plus program, and in Portugal on the 18th of July, we hope to open up more posts and places in Erasmus across Europe, and also open it up to other areas of education, for example, secondary education and especially professional education, so that everyone, all youngsters, can have a taste of Erasmus and have the notion of participating in Erasmus in many different dimensions. So that is certainly our ambition. This is something that we did discuss again today when we were talking about European Universities Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Tiago Brandão Rodrigues, please.
Well, very briefly, just to respond to these very significant questions. Firstly, inevitably, the Recovery and Resilience Plan that was tabled by Portugal to the Commission is currently being assessed. And in the education sector, we have more than 1,000 million euros set aside for strategic actions in education. Especially to boost digital skills, to set up digital laboratories, and this will continue with our digital school initiative. So we want, through this transition, to ensure that the new generations be able to respond to the challenges in many areas, programming, robotics, as well as other digital skills. So basically, we want to broaden everything that we already do in our schools in the area of IT, information and communication. We also want to modernize existing professions. We want to improve our vocational training and take advantage of dual certification and have more than 350 specialized technological centers set up to deal with informatics, aeronautics, big data, all these tech areas that are absolutely fundamental. So there's a great challenge, especially when we're looking at opening up the school science clubs. We need to open them up to encourage scientific education and to facilitate the access of youngsters to higher education in these areas. And also encourage adult education through lifelong learning to have access to these digital skills as well. And we want to mobilize, we need to mobilize more than 30,000 vulnerable people to increase their participation in this area. And this is something that we're going to be discussing over lunch today. And we feel that the work being done on R&I in Portugal is a good example. On Erasmus, yes, if you think that the program began back in 1987, Portugal was in the first round of youngsters participating in this, and since 1987 we've had more than 10 million people participating in this Erasmus program, and the Commission is planning to have yet another 10 million participating in the near future. Now, we've seen a whole series of other activities that are now being brought in under Erasmus Plus. So we want to make sure that we are more inclusive and more focused. And Erasmus Plus also wants to boost the possibility of attracting more youngsters, not only higher education youngsters, but also school youngsters, to make sure that we can broaden the access of the youth to different areas under Erasmus Plus, and to make sure that we also link up with the European Solidarity Fund, which is now finally going to have its own framework program, and make sure that youngsters in informal education can also be involved. So certainly Erasmus Plus will hopefully have a positive spillover effect to the European Solidarity Corps program.
Commissioner, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, yes, indeed. If there is a positive example of how we can promote equality of opportunity, it is indeed our dear Erasmus Plus program. I'm going to tell you how much more inclusive a new program will be. It's one of our top programs. We want an Erasmus Plus program by 2017, which is more inclusive, more green, and more digital. The first thing, our budget, 28 billion euros. Since the program was first launched in 1987, we've given a possibility to 10 million European citizens to take advantage of this. The objective now is to have another 10 million by 2027. So we are multiplying the speed by 5. Secondly, the new Erasmus Plus program is not just for students in higher education. We will be adopting the approach of lifelong learning, which means that there'll be possibilities right from being infant age through to being adult age, various levels of education through to lifelong learning, stressing in particular professional skills. So with that in mind, I think we have a strong message. A second very specific aspect, with the new Erasmus Plus program, we'll be having new partnerships, the more skills partnerships, so that we can allow organizations who have not yet had this experience to be able quickly to join the program. And another very specific aspect, in particular for those who have fewer possibilities or fewer opportunities, we have already proposed a financial backing for individuals and for those who accompany them when they go to have this experience. So I think these are very positive messages, and it's up to all of us to make sure that the Erasmus Plus program works together with national strategies, with other programs in synergy, so that this approach will bring about greater inclusivity whilst providing for excellence and more opportunities for European citizens.
Merci. I think we do not have any other questions, so this is all the time we have for today. Anyway, we will come back around 6 p.m. today for the press conference on youth topics. Thank you and see you later.
Thank you.